To another controversial topic, to which I am no stranger. And it's no exaggeration when I say there are few issues as divisive as the one I'm about to raise next. All over the world, statues are coming down. In just the last couple of weeks, New York has removed from Central Park the statue of a doctor who tortured enslaved black women. India has brought down Lenin, and Canadians have defaced statues of Queen Victoria. In Britain, Bristol has agreed to rename its famous music hall, removing the name of Edward Colston, one of the nation's most prolific slave traders. Now it's time to take a long, hard look at other hugely problematic figures we continue to glorify, such as Horatio Nelson, Cecil Rhodes, and yes, Winston Churchill. I'm not saying we should necessarily bring them down. Take a deep breath, everyone.
You did
but
originally.
All options should be on the table. As the global movement to re-question our so-called heroes shows, the thing that's clear is this. Doing nothing, burying our heads in the sand, and hoping this debate will go away is simply no longer an option. Hi, Nick.
Afua. Afua. I really like you, but I wonder if I can remind you of some words you wrote concerning Britain.
Please do.
Britain. We have moved on from this era no more than the US from its slavery and segregationist past. The difference is that America is now in the midst of a frenzied debate on what to do about it, whereas Britain, in our inertia, arrogance and intellectual laziness, is not.
I don't write half bad, do I?
Well, you could have been a bit snappier, but I won't worry about subbing it. I'm delighted to... Why do you stay in this country? If you take such offence when you see Nelson's column, if you take such offence when you hear Winston Churchill's name, who I would argue, if in the unlikely event that anybody want to have a poll, I would say probably 80 to 90% of people would say that Winston Churchill did a good thing. I'm delighted that I see you at these Thursdays. I'm delighted you up to stand. But if it offends you so much, how do you manage to stay here?
I find that a really strange thing to say.
So
there's nothing in Britain that bothers you?
Sure, but I don't want to pull it down.
So why is leaving an option?
But I don't want to pull it down.
This is my country. And the reason that I raise this critique is not because I hate Britain, it's because I care about this country. I actually care about our honesty, our ability to move forward into a progressive future. I care about it. Otherwise, I would just leave it to you lot.
How is it honest to decide to bring down Nelson's column or to do away with the Churchill War Rooms or to change the name of a concert? Is that the biggest problem that people who have, non-white people have in Bristol? The name of the town hall or the concert hall or whatever it is? That's their biggest problem?
Actually, it is a big problem.
Really?
You know why?
So I'm a black woman in Bristol and I'm concerned about Colston Hall.
There's a councillor in Bristol who I was talking to recently called Cleo Lake, who is of West Indian heritage, and her school was named after Colston, and every day they have this celebration where they celebrate Colston. Every day, every year, they have a big Colston Day. Sorry, that would be a lot.
Well, even I might say.
There you go.
Gosh, yeah.
And she was telling me how when she found out the history, she felt it to her core, and she raised it with her teachers. And she said, wait, just let me finish. Why do we glorify this man? He was the kind of person who sold and enslaved and tortured my ancestors. And they wouldn't listen to her, and that affected her to her core. It affected her education. It affected her confidence because she knew something that was being denied.
I would imagine you're in support of statues to Gandhi.
No, not necessarily.
You don't
in fact, in Ghana, which is where my mother's from, they've removed Gandhi
Nelson
because
Mandela?
He was racist.
Are we happy with statues?
Well, it's funny you should say that because I made a documentary in which we questioned Nelson Mandela as well.
That's not the question he asked, though.
No, can I just make this clear? Because I know what you're going to say. I am saying we should be debating the way we look at history. I'm not saying only white men. I'm saying history in general. But it just so happens that a lot of white men did a lot of bad things we never talk about.
I've been waiting patiently.
We only talk about.
Well, I'm really curious because let's take Churchill. I mean, you know, obviously, a lot of the controversy around Churchill's historical record applies to what he did in South Asia with the Bengali famine and so on and so forth. And I don't think it's anyone here is suggesting that we remove references to that in history. I think the question is, when looking at historical figures, what we're celebrating about them, for example, if they happen to have saved our very civilization, then there may be something worth celebrating for. What I'm really confused at, having you know, coming from the heritage that should be offended at Churchill's record in South Asia, I can recognise he saved our country. What I'm really confused at is when we spoke about Winnie Mandela, and I raised the issue of the fact that she was a fan of necklacing, a fan of burning,
Just explain what necklacing
burning people to death. on the mere accusation that they were collaborators in the shanty towns in South Africa. You were very happy to not only argue in her defence, but write a column defending her legacy as somebody that fought apartheid.
So shall I explain?
You've explained it before, so allow me to.
So
I know, but allow me to tell you where I have a problem with your explanation, because that'll be more concise. You can respond to it. You talked about power structures and how you're about tearing down power.
I'm not about tearing down power. I'm about correcting the record.
I'm
correcting
the record, right?
the narrative.
But actually, in South Africa, Winnie Mandela had all the power, and those people she burnt to death had no power
she had all
and
the
no
power
defence.
When she was arrested and held in solitary isolation by the apartheid authorities.
How was she?
We haven't got time to debate Winnie Mandela.
I'm talking about the fact that she was burning people to death.
She denied that, and actually the victims who she's alleged to...
This is about getting off topic.
Just before we move on, let's just hear a clip, because this is exactly what we're talking about, and then, Carol, you will come in.
OK.
This is from a documentary I've made on this very subject, which is going out on Channel 4 next week.
This is probably the place where you can best see how Britain thinks about its military history of the last 200 years. It's the great, glorious imperial history. What is interesting, I think, is how unquestioning it is. It's just, we won, here's the monument, good for us. There's no mention of the victims on the other side, and there's no thought of who caused all this.
That is not some loony lefty, that's Neil McGregor.
Okay.
So, and historians agree that we have erased a huge part of the
Okay, can we remind us...
Historians don't agree on anything.
Yeah.
Statues can be a reminder of our past, good and bad. Let's talk, briefly about, and statues they're not always built to comfort or console or to honour. They can be a salutary warning. Now, there's nothing about the Confederacy that was noble. Its raison d'etre was slavery. But there is something very noble and necessary about a free people preserving its history and knowing who they are, where they come from, and how they should be living now. And I think that's really important. Statues don't always glorify people. However, in the case of Churchill and the case of Nelson, I think they absolutely should. And I think, as Nick says, 80–90% of people in this country would. Yeah. But I think some of the Confederate statues... Can I just read you a quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., who said in 1884, he said, "I believe from the bottom of my heart that our memorial halls, statues, tablets, tattered flags are worth more to our young people by way of chastening and inspiration than the monuments of another 100 years of peaceful life could ever be." I think that's absolutely true. A statue doesn't have to be pulled down. It can be there as a chastener.
The key to what I'm saying, before you say this, Rach, just because I feel like you both have said something and I haven't had a chance to correct it. What I'm talking about is correcting the record, right? So Majid, you said...
You don't have to.
No, Majid
people
said,
know their history.
Majid mentioned the Bengal famine.
Our history,
how many British people...
Look,
how many British people do you think know about the Bengal famine?
No.
Yes, come in, Rachel.
You cannot correct and change the past.
It's not changing the past.
It's
changing what we say about it. We don't know about the past in Britain. We don't know about the past.
Afua, the point is that this is where we are. This is how we have got to the point we are. We can't go back and delete and correct according to today's norms and today's morals and today's thinking.
Teach it in the schools.
That is the opposite of what I'm saying, though.
No, you're not. You're saying that we have to make the past appropriate to the present.
That is the opposite
we can
of
never
what I'm saying.
do that.
The absolute opposite.
Yes, you are, because you're saying we must question the fact that we're putting on a pedestal the men that we now find reprehensible.
And the reason for questioning it is because we're looking at their past. Now, listen, if we talk about Churchill, we talk about him winning the war and saving us from the Nazis, and we talk... Just let me finish, because you've
got a documentary going on. I can just say one thing.
You've just said the opposite of what my argument is, Rachel.
Rachel just finish her point.
Rachel's point is a misunderstanding.
I find it deeply... I am as liberal as the next man. I find this deeply upsetting and also almost insulting.
That's because you misunderstand what I'm saying.
No, I'm not. And I fear that you're taking this country down the path of when ISIS goes into Palmyra and knocks down temples, goes through rampages through museums in Mosul.
Or like what Britain did in the Empire, destroying people's statues and histories and palaces.
You cannot decide just because a culture has some unwelcome baggage that you dump the baggage because it's no longer useful on your journey.
Can I speak
we
now?
have the baggage.
Can I speak now? I want to say something. Right. First of all, I'm not saying, and I said clearly in my intro, we should necessarily take them down. This is what I want, a debate. And the reason I want that is because we don't have it, Rachel. And the reason this is not a... I am the opposite of trying to erase our history. I want us to know our history. So when we look at Churchill, I would like people to know about using aerial policing in Mesopotamia and not distinguishing between civilians. And I would like people to know about 3 to 4 million people dying.
What about the things he's really famous for?
As winning
like
the war.
defeating Hitler,
exactly.
like saving
Which
the country,
like saving Western democracy,
like saving more Jews from being exterminated.
When we talk about Nelson, I want us to remember the Napoleonic Wars. I want to remember the existential victory against the French.
And if he wasn't on that pedestal, Napoleon.
I want to remember the same show. We only know one side. This is about bringing the full fact.
There seems to be a reasonable...
We don't learn history.
Guys, please, there seems to be a reasonable way forward here. If what I'm hearing you say now is about education, let's talk about the curriculum and what's being taught in schools and a multi-dimensional approach to history, which is fantastic. Let's not talk about tearing statues down. And also, actually, in terms of statues, what they did in Oxford with Rhodes, there's another way forward as an alternative here as well. We can leave the original statues up, and there's plenty of space in this country.
The statute of limitations has run out, and the statues debate we move on.
Very good.